Hello everyone, welcome to a new weapon refined priority tier list update. This time we'll be looking at Sully, Stahl, Lucas, and Fave. A fairly uninteresting batch of heroes, to be honest. But, well, let's get through it. Alright, so. Starting with Stahl. And thank you to Speedy Hawk for actually getting the screenshot I had to use for the Panther Sword. Stahl's sword is basically, the best way I can put it is kind of like the opposite of Kane, except having a shittier base effect that can actually help sometimes. It's an enemy phase brace sword. Purely enemy phase, which is a cool concept if it wasn't for the fact that it's on a fucking gem weapon. Well, it's still useful against Surtur, and we'll get to that a bit later. Obviously you want attack plus on him. It's a brave weapon, basically. Of course you'd want attack plus. It's a bit awkward to use, and I feel like, guess what, the base effect that Abel and Kane had was perfect as is. You could have just made Kane and Abel, but enemy phase, and that would have made them actually pretty good, because the base effect is ideal for an enemy phase tank. Right? So the fact that Sully and Stahl are just worse than, well, Abel and Kane actually is offset by the fact that they can fully use the base effect in conjunction with the second effect. Instead, we got gem weapons because Highest has a hate boner for everyone that's designed by the RNG roulette to get a gem weapon as their first weapon, unless they're from Fates, because it's Fates, right? Fucking end my life. So here we are with the Panther Sword, of course. When it comes on to build, it's pretty easy to see what I'm going for, since ideally you'll be using him to deal with Surtur. So one of the things you can do is just buff up entirely for free, because you'll be using him in a full horse team. So mostly in Arena Assault you'll be using him. You get hit by Surtur Menace, who cares? He gets hit by Sinmara, that's actually a good thing, because then your 56 attack just jumps back up to 70. And 70 with the power of, well, gem weapons, you have 98 attack against Surtur. Typically that just kills him off. It doesn't matter what the fuck he has, he just dies. So this is a great Surtur counter if you don't have enough of those. And it allows you to use a full horse team for basically very cheap. Other than that, well, you can just basically bait anything that's a green armored unit, even Grima. If you're in Vantage, you can maybe even pick off some reds. If it's Halloween Mur with the typical Fortress Def Res Special Fighter set, I strongly advise against it unless you have a spec ready. It's pretty rudimentary. I will say though, if you have the choice between this or Kane Enable all day, every day, because I'm gonna be honest here, the gem weapon will tend to be working against you more than it does help you. So yeah. Like, for example, certain blues you'd be able to possibly even tank, because this guy is a monster of a tank to some extent. But because it's a gem weapon, because the fact is he doesn't get any stat indefinite attack like Kane and Abel does, he can't. As a matter of fact, I think Kane is able to, no pun intended, but he's able to just tank better, which is just kind of sad. Oh well, it is what it is. Vantage is It's honestly just a good option in general. It's not like he has many options, is the problem. You could decide to go Mystic Boost, but yet again, that's more relevant for a unit like Kane, who can actually, you know, take a beating regardless of color. It's quite unfortunate, but it is what it is. This is why he's S-. Do keep in mind, his weapon is still solid enough as a Surtur counter or a green armor, or, well, green unit counter, period. But outside of that, not much. And second, in the downgrade train, we have the downgrade of Abel himself. Sully. Sully just has a copy of what Stahl does. But however, unlike Kane and Abel, who basically have the very same stat line for the most part, it's just that Abel has an extra attack point, Sully has a vastly different stat line over Stahl. She has a lot of speed, so you can use her a bit more proactively in a way. Sometimes, in player phase, you just won't be able to go, you know, you'll be able to catch kills on player phase here and there if needed. Other than that, she's typically going to be using bonds, because with her speed, and attack speed bond, you don't really need it all that much, not nearly as much at +10, but when you're on lower merges, it can make the difference. Easily make the difference. But, like I said, while it can make the difference, on higher merges, you're already at so much speed. Still, if you feel like you really need this, for example, for units such as Zelgus, this is a good option. She's a good counter to Halloween Myrrh, which is a fairly difficult unit to deal with. Idun also, if you do find her. Zelgus, as I said before. A lot of red, such as these. Also Sita, since she does appear quite a bit in Arena Assault due to red dual flyer. She can also tank a Versa if needed pretty well, actually pretty much taking no damage from her. And that's kind of the gist of it. She can be a player phase unit against certain red, and that's good. But outside of that, she doesn't have a whole lot going for her. Guard is a good way to stop specials, but you can also use Mystic Boost since she is a lot more proactive than Stahl is. Since Stahl's is pretty much you're either enemy phase or you're not worth your time, essentially. Still, despite her overall performance being better, the problem is, outside of being an AA check just like Stahl, the weapon gimps her quite a bit. Dealing with blues can be a bit difficult also. So, it really comes down to the situation, I suppose. I would definitely say, you know, stat line wise, she's actually better than Stahl, but being blue is the biggest problem here. Still, she's decent, and if you're going to upgrade Stahl just to deal with Surtur, you may as well upgrade her to deal with Halloween Myrrh, Idun, and so on. So, yeah. Moving on to one of the most unoriginal, uninteresting, and actually downright disgusting refine we've had in a long time, Daybreak Lance. Now, I'm not saying this in the sense that the refine is useless for him, it's actually decent, though a death refine of this very same weapon is just basically 4 less attack on enemy phase, and that's it, while having 4 more defense on player phase. But while I do say so, the main problem I have with it is that we've already had refines that were just so much better. Why the fuck did we not just get Tiki's refine, but instead of sword and dragons it would be lances and swords, to refer to Clive and all? I don't know for you, but I feel like that would be better. The thing with Tiki is that the Refine is essentially, first off, 2 range, which means you can still be in range while, you know, avoiding a versus effect or sudden panic. Not that, you know, Lucas really gets hit by those, but it's still worth mentioning. It also allows you to attack while keeping the buff, it allows you to defend while doing the buff, and it gives an extra 1 attack and 1 def on top of it. Like, it's just superior in every way, except for the fact that you have to play your team a bit more around it. But that's not exactly a bad thing. Overall, I'd say Tiki's Refine is better, and Tiki's Refine is over a year old, I think. So, what happened? It's so unoriginal and downright depressing to see that this is what he got. This is why he's A tier. It's not that the Refine is worthless, it's that it doesn't bring enough to warrant the do. In a world where we have units such as, where we have weapon refines such as Basilicos, Greto's Pole Axe, Alm's Falchion, the Awakening Falchion, Est's really broken ass lance, Katria's lance also, hell, Perry's lance, and even Inoka's lance. Getting this is just mediocre and downright depressing. As for builds, well, it's very linear. Like, what do you expect me to do with this? Is already an enemy phase unit, so you basically use the lance and keep the same set. Oh, yeah. Steady Breath with Bonfire allows you to proc Bonfire twice a fight. It's pretty standard. You get hit, proc, you get hit, you proc. That is, if he even lives the first time. You really only need attack and def buffs, which is why I only have buffs in attack and def here. The rest can be helpful here and there, but it's not needed nearly as much. And that's kinda it. Guard to block special, since honestly that's his biggest weakness against melee units. And quick repose in the seal, because quick repose is just standard. It's just basic, like just like the Refine. But yeah, A tier. Moving on to Fave, who actually was A tier. I ended up thinking it over and decided to put her up to A+. So, oh, and also, I want to say thank you to Roag CL for the picture for Soli's Refine and Picro for Lucas's Refine. Also, ASPL for Faye's Refine. And the Bow of Devotion. Now, I don't typically talk about too much of the base effects of weapon, because those are kind of obvious. When it comes on to Faye, it's a bit more different. Faye has one of the worst base effects to go with a Refine. Remember, Guard Bow is a thing, and it buffs Def and Res by 2 extra points. It does not give you the useless speed that actually works against you. But it does lose in the department of attack, which is the main thing that Faye needs, by 6. So you're kind of force taking the weapon, you're kind of force taking the Refine as a result, but the speed actually shafts you. Let me explain. You're giving a weapon quick repose, but you're also giving the unit speed. Okay, that makes sense for a unit like Roy, because that way you can avoid damage, because of stuff like no follow-up and so on and so forth. Here, however, and also Roy actually has an attack stat, a pretty decent weapon, very easy access to buffs and so on. A lot easier of a time here. Faye, on the other hand, is, well, has very middling speed, but the problem is that it's middling and not terrible. So, what happens is that her speed prevents follow-up that you actually want to get hit by. Because if you're getting hit by anything with Faye, it's going to be, well, guess what? Ranged units, because you're not going to try to bait melee units with this, since all of your kit should be focused on tanking ranged units better, right? So the problem with speed is that, as I said earlier, Fave's main problem is dealing with damage. Especially on lower merges. On higher merges it's not nearly as big of a problem, but if you're using like an unmerged Fae, this is a massive problem. Because then you end up in a situation where you need to rely on Iceberg, you need to rely on Bonfire, depending on how you build your unit, depending on how the IVs are. So you're reliant on those skills to kill, right? The fact that you're missing getting hit twice means that you're actually failing to get the 3 charge to proc Iceberg or Bonfire, which actually hurts you. Because then you don't get the kill, and then said unit could get danced, and then you lose a unit, and so on. That's kind of a problem. And besides, you already have the follow-up from Quick Riposte, so the speed doesn't actually help in its... IS has a really stupid habit that they've yet to break, of either buffing 2 stats or buffing all of them. It's like they don't even look at the unit, they're like, okay, Faye, I can't be Ash, just buff everything. Instead of being like, or being like, we could buff 2 stat, but then Garbo's better, fuck it, just let's buff all of them. They could have just buffed all 3 stats by bigger numbers. It's not complicated. They could have done just attack, def, res plus 5 or 6. And guess what? That would have actually been a lot better. Because then the weapon doesn't work against itself nearly as much. The Quick Riposte 5 is honestly really good. It's very basic, but honestly that's what she needs. It also opens her B skill for something like No See Disrupt, while also opening your seal slot for another distant defense, which is really good. Speaking of builds, this is the ideal build in my opinion for her. This allows her to deal with units such as Veronica, Dazzling Staff, Pain Plus, and so on, and just kill them. The Stendef 4 also completely deals with stuff that are like Blade Tomes, which are one of the biggest problems she would have to tank otherwise. Because even in this situation, she has 53 res. Blade Tome typically hits upward to 80 attack. She gets killed. You get the idea. However, if you take the very same set, right? If you take the very same set and then have this in Def 4, then their attack basically gets reduced to 0 because you're completely getting rid of all the buffs. Again, as I said, the speed is middling, and that's kind of a problem against a lot of units, preventing a few doubles here and there. Oh well, it's kind of what it is. You kind of need the bow anyway, because like I said, her attack is like right here it would be 55 with guard bow, and here instead it jumps up to 61. That does quite a bit. And with attack, well, that was without attack def bond, but you get the idea. You can jump up to 66 attack with this. This actually makes up for the fact that you have too much speed. And if you're using her with Azura, that can also backfire, because then again you could be buffing her speed, prevents Iceberg from proccing, but it's still to some extent fine. It just comes down to the point that you need to have the attack to pull it off, which is why you want to have attack def bond, which also, you know, evens out her def and res. So, yeah. I don't think I have much else to say about this. In conclusion, I do think that Stahl, Sully, and Faye are worth refining. Lucas is... I guess you should pick up the weapon if you think that the 2 attack will help you. As for refining it, I don't know. I would not go about it. I would not take it, personally. But, yeah. I think that's all I had to say about this, and hopefully you learned a thing or two about this. As per usual, I'll see you all later in the comments. Have a good night, everybody, and don't forget, today is Mother's Day. Say hi to your mom or something. So, have a nice one, y'all.